I remember the rock sailing by my head. Nothing wakes you up like the sound of a sharp object, narrowly missing something vital. Sobered me up faster than a splash of cold water and a shot of espresso. I jerked suddenly, rolled to my side. I hadn't realized that it was a rock yet. Combat training from a career I failed at possessed me, and in my head, I was taking cover from enemy fire. The next object that missed my skull sunk into the earth beside me. I saw it that time. A large stone. Something was hurling rocks at me like they were missiles from an RPG. Dirt splashed up and into my mouth. I pushed aside crumpled beer cans from the night before and crawled onto my forearms toward the tent. I'd gone out camping the night before. Familiar spot. Surrounded by wilderness and far enough from the popular trails to keep my antics from disturbing any other campers. A lot of people came out of those woods. Not many of them traveled as deeply as I did, though. I liked my privacy. I always cleaned up after myself, extinguished my fires properly, and left the woods as if I was never there. This time, something had spotted me, though. I needed to get to the tent. Inside, there was a small axe and a rifle. I was still at the mercy of my programming. I needed to get my weapon. I needed to return fire and find a way out of this situation. I didn't know how many enemies were there. I didn't know how far they were positioned from my camp. I only knew that I was dead if I didn't defend myself. The next stone hit the tent, tore it to shreds. I watched as the material flayed and the support beams buckled. It collapsed and tumbled as if a tornado had touched down beside it. For a moment, I wished a strong gust of wind would blow me away. Anything to get me out of there. I risked a look at the trees around me, knowing how long it would take to claw my way through the tent to find my gun. I saw them out there. At least 3. I was in the middle of an ambush. I thought they were ghillie suits. I thought I'd been set up by a trio of stealthy hunters. I don't know which was scarier. The thought of being hunted by a group of men while I slept at night, or what I saw next. I saw them open their mouths and roar. Scream, more accurately. A high-pitched whoop like a chimp or a monkey. They were taunting me, and they weren't human. The longer I looked, the more I realized how big they were. I'd barely rise to their chest. Their shoulders were twice as wide as mine. Long brown-orange fur hung from their bodies like some sort of orangutan. They were getting louder. It wouldn't be long before they reached for another stone. Or worse. I climbed to my knees and scurried to the remains of the tent. I worked my way through the layers of the shredded tarp, searching for the rifle I knew was buried inside. A rock crashed into my shoulder, and my face hit the mud. The wind was knocked from my body, but I was still conscious. I ignored the pain and continued my search. My fingers found the case just as I heard the heavy footfalls break into a sprint. They were running toward me, still shrieking, that animalistic war cry. I tried to remember which one of them was closer. I'd only have time for a single shot. Maybe, when the others closed in around me, I'd have an axe in hand. That wasn't likely. I hadn't even seen it yet. I could practically feel the monster's breath on my neck as I flicked the lock and opened the cast. I drew the rifle and turned around as quickly as I could. I didn't have time to aim. I had to pray and squeeze the trigger. The rifle screamed back at them. I screamed too. I screamed so loudly that the sound of the bullet firing melted into my own voice. I fired and missed, and I watched them all turn to run. I couldn't afford to let them regroup. I still wasn't safe. I clumsily raised myself to one knee and tried to point the barrel at the largest furry back in sight. I still hadn't caught my breath from my own war cry. This time, I was silent when I pulled the trigger. The rifle cried out again. I saw the creature's hair kick up in the wind as the bullet made contact with its lower back. It lurched, limped, but kept moving. I heard it moan as it disappeared into the trees. That time, I didn't clean up my campsite. The fire was already out, but the beer cans stayed where they fell. I dug up the axe, fastened it to my belt, and ran. Luckily, the trail was in the opposite direction of the way the monsters fled. I could get back to safety without crossing their paths again. Even as my lungs caught fire, I couldn't stop running. I hit the trail, the parking lot, the driver's seat. I locked my doors, finally felt a moment of safety, and burst into tears. In all my life, I never felt so close to death. I never felt like somebody's prey. I'd been humbled, I guess. The forest was telling me that it wasn't my place to party. I haven't gone back since. I haven't told the story to many people either. You see, for me, it's not about being believed or warning the next group of people who want to pitch a tent in the woods. For me, I just want to forget. I want to stop waking up in the middle of the night, remembering the sounds of that first stone whizzing past my head. Look, I've lived in New York City my entire life, and not in the nice places either. I've pretty much moved from nasty hole to nasty hole my entire life. The point I'm driving here is I've seen some bizarro things in my life. You see it all the time, and eventually you get used to it. Not sure I've ever had a so-called normal day in my life, and rats specifically. It's freaking New York City. I've seen some giant rats in my day. Hell, I've slept with them. But man, I'm telling you, this one rat I saw was out of a freaking horror movie. I've worked at this restaurant for a few years now. Nothing fancy. Wouldn't recommend it. But it's a job, and it pays the bills for the time being. But I tell you what, it's given me the experience of a lifetime. Look, I've gone down to that basement more times than I can count. It's always the same routine. Flick on the light, grab what I need, and get the hell out of there. But this time was different. The basement door was wide open, which was weird, because I always made sure to lock it. I shrugged it off and went down the stairs. As soon as I stumbled onto the basement floor, I heard a noise. It was like a scratching, scurrying sound, and it was coming from somewhere nearby. I scanned the room, and that's when I saw it. Again, it's New York. I thought it was just another giant rat. But the closer I got to this thing, it must have been the size of a freaking mastiff, like 120 pounds. Its nasty, beady little eyes glinted in the dim light, and I swear to God, it was staring right at me. It had this nasty, mangy, patchy fur, and its tail must have been as big as my freaking arm. And the teeth. Oh, the teeth. They were razor sharp and yellow, and it was looking at me like it hadn't had a good meal in weeks. I froze, man. I didn't know what to do. The rat just stood there, its beating little eyes boring into my freaking soul, and then it started moving. It was slow at first, but then, before I knew it, that thing was charging right at me. The closest thing I had to me was a broom, and I grabbed that thing, and I whacked the beast in the face, breaking the broom in half. I had to dive out of the way, and the creature slammed into the wall. You could hear it make a nice big thud as it hit the wall. The beast had some serious weight to it. I was in pure survival mode at this point. I had never seen anything like this giant rat, and I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to make it out alive. The broom was useless now, broken in half from my desperate attempt to defend myself. The giant rat charged at me again, and I managed to dodge it to the side, and I took off toward the door. But that thing was a lot faster than it looked, and it caught up to me in no time. It lunged at me again, its nasty, freaking yellow teeth bared, and I braced myself for impact. But then, in a split-second decision, I grabbed the first thing I could, a big old trash can. I swung that thing with all my might, and it connected right to the side of the rat's big, ugly face. The force of the impact sent the creature sprawling across the floor. I didn't waste any time. I ran over to the rat, grabbed it by the tail, and started dragging it toward the door. The tail was freaking huge and meaty. That damn rat was heavy, but I was determined to get it the hell out of there. It squirmed and writhed in my grasp, but I held tight. Finally, I made it to the door. I kicked it open and heaved the beast out into the alley. It hit the pavement with a sickening thud, and I swear, I heard it make this nasty squealing sound that I can still hear in my head. I slammed and locked the door shut, and I thank God that I survived. I was out of breath, and I was exhausted, but I was relieved the damn thing didn't kill me. I was a freaking hero and had defeated the giant rat. As I made my way back up the stairs, I knew that this was a story I would be telling for a long, long time. I never saw that thing again, but I knew it was still out there somewhere. I started to carry a baseball bat with me whenever I went into the basement, just in case. I always was looking over my shoulder and was ready for a fight with another giant rodent. The coolest part is I researched and researched giant rat sightings, and mine was the biggest recorded rat in history. Go ahead, look it up. Maybe in prehistoric times they had bigger rodents, but as far as rats go, I beat the baddest of them all. After that night, I made sure to always keep a watchful eye when going into the basement. I never saw a rat that big again, but I still felt uneasy down there. The encounter with the giant rat changed me. It made me realize that there are still so many things in this world that we don't understand. It made me more cautious, but also more curious. I think about how easily that thing could have killed me all the time, had I not acted quickly and had God's protection on my side that day. I would have been rat food. What a horrible way to go. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. The sickening part of it all is that thing is still probably out there, scurrying around. A couple of years ago, I moved to a small town in Virginia to get away from the chaos and politics of the big city. I was ready for a quieter, calmer life. I had since gotten a job for a small accounting firm, and it had been a big change from my old job working for a huge corporation. I do miss all the money I used to make, but there's no doubt that I made the right decision. I was miserable at my old job, and I felt like a completely different person now that I've moved here. The house I live in is way up in the mountains, and the closest store is like 40 minutes away. So it's definitely in the middle of nowhere. It gives me a lot of perspective and a clear head to be surrounded by nature when I'm not in town working or running errands. I was an outdoorsy and adventurous kid, so it's been nice to get back into all that kind of stuff. One day, I was hiking when I came across this beautiful river that I had no idea was there. I was really excited, and I started making my way over to the river. All of a sudden, I started to get a weird feeling, like someone was watching me. The air started getting colder and heavier, and my hairs were standing up on end. The river was so beautiful, but all of my instincts were telling me to get out of there. I turned around and started making my way out when I saw a figure in the distance. It didn't seem to be walking, but I could tell it was getting closer and closer to me, like it was floating towards me. I was terrified, and I couldn't move. The closer the figure got to me, I could tell it was an apparition of a woman. She had this faint glow around her. Her skin was extremely pale, and her eyes were looking right at me intensely. It was like she was staring into my soul. As the spirit got closer to me, my heart was pounding so hard, and I wanted to run away so badly, but I was scared, and I couldn't move a muscle. The apparition floated closer and closer until she was right in front of me. As she got closer to me, I could feel cold air coming at me, like I opened the door to the fridge or something. Then she moved right through me, and I was freezing cold, and my body felt like it was struck by lightning. I was trying to scream, but I couldn't do anything. It was like I was completely paralyzed, and I couldn't move a single muscle. My whole body was tingling, and I was absolutely freaked out. After a few moments that felt like a freaking eternity, I was finally able to turn my head and look around, but she was nowhere to be found. The apparition had disappeared, and I was left there, standing alone and terrified. After that, I blacked out, and the next thing I remember, I was opening my eyes, and she was hovering over my body. She had this terrible look on her face. Her eyes were super wide, and she was grimacing. Her arms were outstretched, and she was just floating above my body. Again, I tried to scream, but I couldn't. I was completely paralyzed again, and I was sure she was going to kill me. Then, after a while, she just vanished. I eventually was able to get up, and I took off back into the woods and sprinted all the way home. I was panting so hard that I thought I was going to pass out again, but my adrenaline took over, and I've never run that fast in my life. My mind was freaking racing, and I couldn't believe what had just happened. I tried to rationalize it. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but there was no denying what I had seen, and I've never been the same since. Since then, I've returned to that spot on the river many times, trying to communicate with the ghost. Looking at her face, while it terrified me at the time, it haunted me every day afterward, and I wouldn't wish that kind of anguish on my worst enemy. I've tried countless times to communicate with her and encourage her to move on into the afterlife. I haven't seen her since that horrifying experience, but I can still feel her presence every time I return to the river. A couple of my friends are super witchy, and they've gone down there with me to put crystals around, burn sage, and all that kind of weird stuff. Still, nothing seems to work. There is something very off about the energy of that place, and with it being so close to my home, I would do anything to get her to move on from there. My dog Hector won't go anywhere near it. As soon as we get to the clearing, where you can see the river, the hairs on his neck stand up, and he snarls. He's usually a pretty chill dog, but he won't go to the river. And it's weird, because he's a Labrador, so he usually loves water. My witchy friends were telling me that the spirit was evil and demonic, and I've sprinkled holy water all around there before. But deep down, I don't think she's a demon. I just think that something awful happened to her when she was alive by the river. As terrified as she makes me, I just feel terrible for her and it makes me lose sleep sometimes. To spend all eternity in that awful state, only the worst type of people in the world deserve that. I really get the feeling that she was a good person who was trapped after experiencing some horrific trauma. Either way, I'm desperate at this point to help her move on.